He was the charismatic mayor who pushed for a more progressive and inclusive San Francisco.
We're going to spread the action to people whose names never appear in columns, who never appear in the society pages, but who are simply hardworking, dedicated San Franciscans.
My dad was a real liberal. He was a genuine liberal.
Come on out.
His election signified a turning point in LGBTQ rights.
If I win, I have an incredible responsibility to the district and city, but I also know I will carry the responsibility of the gay community.
Harvey was all about challenging the Democratic establishment.
Together, they ushered in a new era in San Francisco politics, pitting a conservative old guard
People of this city are being viciously attacked
against the new liberals.
Do you, George R. Moscone, solemnly swear?
But their terms were cut short.
I went out by way of the rear door, but I was in the mayor's office just prior to Mr. White's entering.
I was the last person, I think, to see Dan White walking in to visit with Mayor Moscone.
Just before 11 a.m., I walked off the elevator on the second floor of City Hall and was almost knocked over by police rushing into the back door of the mayor's office.
The men were murdered by one of their own colleagues.
I opened the door, I found Harvey on his stomach. I tried to get a pulse and put my finger through a bullet hole.
As president of the Board of Supervisors, it's my duty to make this announcement. Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed. The suspect is Supervisor Dan White.
The subsequent trial would become a spectacle.
How could somebody like Dan White, this all-American boy, do such a despicable thing?
There's no sane person in a sane moment proactively killing somebody.
Sources telling me today that when Dan White went into one of these depressive states, he would stay in the house, lie in bed, and watch television. The interesting note is what he ate while he was in one of these moods. Foods with high sugar content like Coke, Pepsi, cupcakes, and Twinkies.
And when the verdict ultimately came down, outrage spilled out onto the streets.
There was inordinate surprise at the verdict.
It was just hurtful. It's just painful.
They ignored the facts.
The tension began to increase and increase until it blew up.
It all started with a murder at City Hall. San Francisco was filled with pent-up emotions in the late 1970s. A string of high-profile crimes captivated the city as the population reeled from the social freedoms born out of the summer of love in the 1960s. The city by the Bay had become the gay capital of the United States, and a new regime of political movers and shakers were opening doors for the everyday citizen. Old San Francisco was clashing with a new San Francisco.
We're going to spread the action to people whose names never appear in columns, who never appear in the society pages, but who are simply hardworking, dedicated San Franciscans. They're going to start to believe that something new is going to happen in City Hall.
George Moscone was born in San Francisco just before the Depression. His parents were Italian-American immigrants who settled in the city's Marina District.
He was like porous. You felt him. He was not cool in any way. He was super cool, like as in, dude knew how to dress. He was a full-on extrovert. And he was always interested in the culture of arts or the culture of sports.
He attended private Catholic schools before heading to college, ultimately getting his law degree back in his hometown. It was there he met Willie Brown.
George Moscone and I were on the same janitorial cleaning team at the law school because we were both working our way through law school. George was a very smart guy, very talented guy, became a quality practicing lawyer, and ultimately somebody that many of us supported for elective office.
Moscone was encouraged to run for a state assembly seat in 1960. He lost, but he did go on to win a seat on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors 3 years later.
This failing by a 5-5 vote, the principal motion came up and I voted against it.
It was on that board that Moscone would make a name for himself as a crusader for poor people, small business owners, and racial minorities.
Moscone went to Mississippi in the civil rights movement for the purpose of getting affidavits of black people who had been barred from registering to vote and been barred from voting.
Moscone did not spend long on the Board of Supervisors. As a state senator, he was part of a progressive alliance of political leaders also out of San Francisco.
In the capacity of state senate, he became the state senate leader. It really was a complete ratification and acknowledgement of his extraordinary talent.
And then this is an ideal opportunity. If we let it pass, then I think California is less than the #1 state it claims to be.
In Sacramento, Moscone fought for school lunch programs in public schools and to legalize abortion in California. He was also a proponent of gay rights, working with his college friend, Willie Brown, to pass a bill repealing the state's sodomy laws.
We knew what liberal was, and my dad was a real liberal. He was a genuine liberal.
Encouraged by support from his Senate run and growing support from the city's LGBTQ community, Moscone decided to make a run for mayor.
When George decided to run for mayor, we were all for him.
He ran as a family man. He ran as much as he could from a family perspective. He loved showing the family off. He loved the kids, always there. It was like a big thing for him.
He won by 5,000 votes. Too few to declare an all-out victory, but good enough for a runoff election, one that would change the face of San Francisco politics.
That's not the way we're going to do business in San Francisco anymore.
It was not a pretty liberal city before then. It had liberal communities, but it didn't have liberal power.
He harnessed the support from the liberal sources, the hospital workers, the bus drivers, and people like that.
That campaign also included support from volunteers from some of the city's most vulnerable populations.
When he ran for mayor, he gave a speech that talked about that this city should not belong to white men anymore.
The things that I've stood for in 12 years of public office, the things that I talked about in 12 years of public office are important.
Do you, George R. Moscone, solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States?
George Moscone was a popular and wonderful mayor.
Change will not be easy.
You could have differences with a mayor, but you know, George had lived a life. He lived it fully. He lived it with abundanza.
Moscone spent his first year as mayor fighting to keep the San Francisco Giants baseball team from moving to Toronto, Canada.
Without George Moscone, the Giants would be in Toronto.
But his biggest one was the cultural shift that he created in who was on commissions, who was appointed, who got jobs, changed.
We can fill the vacancies created by people who've never been asked to serve their city, notwithstanding their extraordinary talent and integrity, because, as you know, they have ordinarily been appointed on the basis of how much they or their sponsors contributed to the campaign of the appointing power.
In the past, people who appointed to boards and commissions had been heavy-duty donors. They had been people from the social discipline world, from the A-list of folk, from people who had titles, and from the business community.
Behind the scenes, he made good on his promise to change city politics. He appointed large numbers of women, gays, lesbians, and racial minorities to city commissions and advisory boards.
He appointed a whole series of people who otherwise would never be considered eligible for any of those commissions.
That included appointing Harvey Milk to the city's Board of Permit Appeals, making him the first openly gay city commissioner in the United States. Harvey Milk was a Navy veteran kicked out of the service for being gay. He moved around the country, landing in San Francisco's Castro district in 1972.
I didn't really take him seriously. He had a ponytail. He had this whole sort of hippie persona, which seemed to me, it seemed he was too old for that.
Bouncing between jobs, he opened Castro Camera in 1973. His camera shop on Castro Street wasn't just where people came to get their memories developed, but where the community congregated and mobilized.
Across the street was a garage where somebody used to park their car. That's been changed. Now it's a travel agency. Not exclusively gay, but catering to the gay people. Run by gay people, operated by gay people. It's thriving.
He was trying to organized the neighborhood, which was transforming in such a rapid rate. It was quite exciting because when I first saw the Castro, it was still a kind of sleepy, mostly Irish and heavily Scandinavian. So the transformation was very exciting to behold, with thousands of kids like myself hitchhiking, taking the bus, train, plane, and by the thousands, you could see it every week. It seemed like there were more and more of us.
Well, there used to be a beauty shop down the street in an old dilapidated building. That's been ripped out. They've gone all the way through, put an outdoor garden cafe restaurant there that's open day and night. They put a lot of little shops in the arcade. It's been so successful that the same people are now going to do the same thing in another part of the city.
Milk made his first run for the Board of Supervisors, San Francisco's version of a city council, in 1973, but lost. He ran for state assembly, but lost. He ran for supervisor again, and lost.
Harvey was gay, and at that time that was a big deal.
But he was winning name recognition and notoriety for being brash, animated, and outspoken.
In San Francisco at the time, you had sort of this old guard, and if you looked at the old guard, it included some very, very courageous people whose contributions perhaps I didn't understand at the time and took, in some cases many years to appreciate fully.
Milk wasn't willing to just go along with the old guard. He proclaimed himself the mayor of Castro Street, cut off his ponytail, and prepared himself for another run at supervisor.
Hi, and I'm Harvey.
This time, he stood a chance at winning. That's because San Francisco changed the way it picked supervisors. Instead of voting for them on citywide ballots, the city was split into different districts, allowing neighborhoods to choose their own representatives.
Harvey was all about challenging the Democratic establishment.
For so long, gay people have been told that you can't stay together for any period of time and maintain a stable relationship.
Milk's leading challenger, Rick Stokes, another gay man.
Harvey represented, quote, the street people. And there wasn't anybody that really represented the suit-wearing people, and that was my category as a lawyer.
Rick Stokes was part of a politically powerful group of gays and lesbians who had achieved some success in changing anti-gay laws.
I thought we got further along by pointing out the similarities, finding natural friends to link up with, and seeking different rights, where Harvey, I think, took the straight approach. I mean, you shove it down people's throat,
Harvey, do you think, if you win in District 5, that you're going to have a special responsibility to the gays in this district?
If I win, I have an incredible responsibility to the district and city. But I also know I will carry the responsibility of the gay community, not just in the city, but that 14-year-old child in Des Moines, Iowa, who needs to know that the system does work.
Milk won his seat, earning nearly twice as many votes as Stokes.
Harvey was a showman. Harvey was kind of bigger than life. Harvey had a puckish quality to him, bigger than life of a member of the Board of Supervisors.
His first action in office to introduce legislation that would outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation.
Today, if I went to, for argument's sake, Macy's or the Emporium and asked for a job, they have the right not to hire me solely because I'm gay. Today, if I went to the St. Francis Hotel to check in a room, they have the right to refuse it solely because I'm gay. This takes out of discrimination those kind of situations.
Mayor Moscone enthusiastically signed the legislation into law. But similar legislation was passing around the country, much to the dismay of Christian conservative singer Anita Bryant.
I guess I never realized when I first got into this just how far it would go and how intense it would get. But certainly the intensity for Save Our Children in pushing for repeal of this, dangerous homosexual ordinance were very intense. As a matter of fact, my pastor, Reverend Chapman, and has said that he would go to jail and even burn the school rather than allow a flaunting homosexual to become a role model.
Bryant's so-called Save Our Children campaign successfully pushed to repeal a similar ordinance in Florida. Her win fueled anti-gay sentiment across the country. including in Milk's home state of California. A statewide initiative would have made firing gay teachers or any public school employees who supported gay rights mandatory. The so-called Briggs Initiative was sponsored by John Briggs, a conservative state legislator from Southern California.
Anybody who teaches in school who was to say, I think it's okay for a gay person to teach. And therefore, since the governor has come out against the Briggs and lieutenant governor, if they were to be teachers after they retire from public office, they would be thrown out because they say it's okay. Labor leaders up and down the state are saying that this initiative is wrong, we should kill it. And therefore, they would not be allowed to teach.
There was incredible grassroots organizing. We had very, very little money. There was a whole separate campaign in LA in Southern California. But Harvey got the attention because at the time he was the only elected gay official in the whole state and one of the first handful in the whole country.
Milk's election empowered people up and down the state.
We have an exorcism of some of the hate that's been thrown out at us in the last couple of weeks.
The Briggs Initiative was overwhelmingly defeated. Victory in hand, Milk became one of Mayor Moscone's closest political allies.
Harvey and George really kind of were the people that imagined the progressive coalition. It was through their work, separately and together, that the people we now call LGBTQ joined the ranks of trade unionists, environmentalists, feminists, and the progressive elements of all of the immigrant communities and the African American community in the city.
But not all San Franciscans were happy with the direction city politics were going. Among them, Supervisor Dan White. Elected at the same time as Harvey Milk, he represented a more conservative western part of the city.
And announced in angry tones that the gloves were off.
Dan White was raised in San Francisco, described by friends and neighbors as an all-American boy. After a stint in Vietnam, he returned to San Francisco and became a police officer. He quit the force and then joined the city's fire department. When the city switched to district elections, White ran for the Board of Supervisors.
You've never done this sort of thing before. How do you know you're doing it right?
Well, I can compare it to a lot of the campaigns that I've studied. I've never been involved as a political candidate before, but the neighborhood reaction here has been fantastic. See, I was raised in this neighborhood for 20 years and then lived in the Crocker Amazon area for the remainder of my life. So I know a lot of the local business people, a lot of the church people, and they have been very supportive.
His district was a largely white, middle-class section of the city. The families who lived there weren't always supportive of the more progressive politics that existed in other parts of San Francisco.
People of this city are being viciously attacked, beaten, robbed, raped every day. And yet the statistics cannot convey what this means throughout San Francisco.
He was a relatively conservative guy, except that he was clearly of the old traditional San Francisco vintage.
Just days after the Briggs Initiative failed, 7 months into his term, Supervisor Dan White abruptly resigned from office.
Dan White succeeded the only time he ever ran for public office. He was elected to the 8th Supervisorial District in San Francisco in 1977, soon after which the city attorney informed him that he would have to resign his job with the fire department under San Francisco law.
He said it was because he couldn't support his wife and baby on a supervisor's salary, just $9,600 a year. To make ends meet, he and his wife sold baked potatoes at a Pier 39 concession stand.
We had to mortgage our home to get into the business because I saw it as an opportunity for my family for the future.
But now what you're saying, though, is that your constituents have to rely on the mayor of this city to come up with a person who will adequately represent your district. True?
Well, that's what you'd hope the mayor would do. I have my priorities, and when I see my family start to suffer because of the effects of the job and of my position, and I see my constituents suffering because they call me up and they deserve to have their supervisor out at community meetings, you know, to learn their problems, to help them as I'm their representative to help them. And when I have to leave them, you know, to go down to earn money, to supplement the income that I'm not getting so my family can be taken care of, then the job is not being done on either front.
When he resigned, it was George's responsibility as the mayor to fill the vacancy.
This is the body of power that determines policy for the city and county of San Francisco.
For Mayor Moscone, White's resignation was an opportunity to flip the Board of Supervisors in his favor. With White in office, the more conservative supervisors held a majority.
But we do know he has strong support from some sides, for instance, like the police department or fire department or some business interests. Do you feel that some of the people are speaking a little more strongly than that to you?
The first priority are the people in District 8. The second priority are the people from all other parts of the district, because they are, in fact, city supervisors. I have to be very concerned that the first priority is met, and at this point, I am not yet certain.
And it's also important to remember that one of the many significant issues that was before that board at the time was the implementation of a consent decree to desegregate the police and fire department. When I got to San Francisco, there were a bare handful of African American officers, very few Latinos, probably no women.
Except there was a hiccup in the plan. A week after he quit, Dan White changed his mind and asked the mayor for his supervisor's job back.
There are many interested candidates, and Dan White, of course, is one of the high-ranking candidates, but I wanted to make clear that I no longer feel that I'm duty-bound to do that. I think it's essential that I've got an appointment to make, that's my appointment to make, for better or worse, for the next 3 years for a very important district of this city.
When he resigned, these groups came to him en masse and said, you've got to get your appointment back. The board was split. He was, in effect, a deciding vote. George had to struggle to get 6 votes for many things.
I think that's a big part of why the Police Officers Association went to Dan after he resigned and said, what the heck are you doing? You know, we paid this money to finance your campaign, to get you on that board, and now you're throwing it away because you're too immature to play. You don't know how it works. You know, I mean, the guy was just dumb politically.
What people don't know is that Dan White and Harvey Milk were friends, and they would meet in the Castro, I think it was every Thursday morning, for coffee.
And Harvey sort of alternated between trying to mentor him and goad him.
And Dan had asked Harvey for help.
White found out that he would not be getting his supervisor's job back on the 26th of November. The next day, George Moscone and Harvey Milk would exchange their last words with Dan White. A phone call from a radio reporter late in the night tipped off Dan White that Mayor Moscone decided not to give him his job back.
So at 9 o'clock that Monday morning, George called me on the phone and said, I'm going to appoint Don Horanzi at 11 o'clock. And at 11 o'clock that morning, Don Horanzi was going to be sworn in. Dan White intended to take his seat at the board at 2 o'clock. So 2 people were going to take the same seat. So I was trying to find Dan to dissuade him.
Cleve Jones met with Harvey Milk earlier that morning. He'd left an important file at home.
I left the file in my apartment on Castro Street, and he was pissed off. He was kind of short with me and said, you need to go back to your apartment and get the damn file. And so I collected my stuff, and I'm on the way out the door, and he could tell I was upset, and he stopped, and he just said, I'm sorry, you know, I'm very stressed right now.
Jones went home to pick the file up. Dan White woke up, called his assistant, and asked her to pick him up at home. When she arrived, White had a Smith & Wesson revolver in a holster strapped to his belt. The gun was loaded with 5 bullets. In his pocket, 10 more. White evaded the metal detectors at City Hall and entered the building through a window on the side. He then headed to the mayor's office on the 2nd floor. He did not have an appointment to see the mayor, not unusual for a supervisor.
And I was the last person, I think, to see Dan White walking in to visit with Mayor Moscone.
Willie Brown was taking a break from a trial at City Hall and visited his friend George Moscone. Moscone told him that he had lined up a replacement for Dan White, Don Horanzi.
He was bringing in somebody who was not going to fight him, and he was going to increase his votes on the board.
and he invited the family to come to City Hall for the purpose of swearing in, so Horenzi could go to work immediately.
Moscone told his staff he'd meet with Dan White one last time.
And I went out by way of the rear door, but I was in the mayor's office just prior to Mr. White's entering.
I, as a matter of fact, walked right in the hallway, and Dan White coming by, and we spoke to each other. And he continued into the mayor's office, and I went out the side door and back up the stairs to the courtroom.
The mayor brought White into a private office and poured him a drink. Staff outside the mayor's office reported hearing loud voices. White drew his .38 special revolver and fired 2 shots into the mayor's body. After the mayor fell to the floor, he shot him twice in the head.
Just before 11 a.m., I walked off the elevator on the 2nd floor of City Hall and was almost knocked over by police rushing into the back door of the mayor's office. The crime was seconds old. I saw the cops, then an ambulance crew rush in and turn right into the mayor's office. Then came more police and sheriff's deputies. No one knew exactly what was going on. Bit by bit, the picture got clearer. The mayor and Supervisor Harvey Milk had been shot.
Word started to spread of a shooting at City Hall.
And somebody yelled at me out the window that Mayor Moscone had been shot. And I thought, my God, who on earth would want to kill George Moscone?
What Cleve Jones was unaware of was that Dan White reloaded his gun, left the mayor's office, and walked down the hall to the Board of Supervisors' offices.
And I saw him come in, and I said, Dan, can I talk to you?
White invited Harvey Milk into his office across the hall.
And I heard the door close, and I heard the shots and smelled the cordite.
Dan White shot Harvey Milk 3 times. When he fell to the floor, he shot him twice in the back of the head.
And nobody was around. Every door was closed. No one was in the clerk's office. I went down the hall. I opened the wrong door. I opened the door. I found Harvey on his stomach. I tried to get a pulse and put my finger through a bullet hole. He was clearly dead.
Feinstein tried to reach the chief of police but couldn't. She was completely unaware of the fact that just down the hall, the mayor lay dead as well.
And finally, he came across and told me that the mayor had been shot and killed.
At about the same time, Cleve Jones had returned to City Hall.
And I saw the police swarming around the east side where the mayor's office is. And I was very frightened. But I had a key to get in, and I ran in calling for Harvey, hey, Harvey, where are you? And as I turned that corner, I saw his feet sticking out of Dan White's office. And I knew it was him because he only had 1 pair of dress shoes, a pair of secondhand wingtips. And at almost exactly that moment, Diane Feinstein came rushing past me. And I saw that there was some blood on her, and then I peered into the office and saw Harvey.
I went out and made the statement on the balcony outside of the Board of Supervisors.
As president of the Board of Supervisors, it's my duty to make this announcement. Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed. The suspect is Supervisor Dan White.
It was a devastating moment. For San Francisco, it was a day of infamy.
Thank you very much. No questions.
Where are you? I'm in the mayor's office. Can I get an ambulance? Code 3, room 200.
What's going on there?
We don't know yet. Who is it, pal?
No, I don't know.
Chaos was how reporters described the scene as they tried to determine what just happened.
This is the mayor?
No comment. No.
Just an hour and a half after Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk were shot and killed, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Dianne Feinstein, called a press conference with other city officials. As acting mayor, Feinstein ordered an immediate state of mourning for the city. She also made it clear that because of the gunshots she heard from her office, she may be called to testify. So at this time, she can't say anything about what led up to this horrible crime.
I was not in the office at the time. I was in my office.
Did you hear shots?
Yes, I heard shots.
How many shots?
I heard 3. I've made a full statement to the police and to the district attorney, and I am under instructions by them not to say anything more.
Most insiders at City Hall were so stunned they could barely speak. Supervisor Terry Francois.
Gee, I was shocked.
Dan White left City Hall.
But he came here to the Doggy Diner on Van Ness Avenue, and in a phone booth like this, he called his wife. She didn't know what had happened. She was working, he said, and the son was at a babysitter. Then he used a 4-letter word and told his wife to meet him at the cathedral. This is where Dan White met his wife. She had no idea what he was going to tell her. In fact, he hadn't even been able to talk to her about the pressure in his mind. He said he felt as though his skull was going to crack. When he told her what he had done, she slumped. They then walked to Northern Station, where he surrendered.
No sooner had the all-point bulletin for Dan White's arrest gone out than he came in here at Northern Police Station on Ellis Street, just off Van Ness, and gave himself up. Within minutes, he was taken to the San Francisco Hall of Justice on Bryant Street. Moscone was wheeled out. I'm told he'd been shot 3 times from a .38 caliber revolver. Bullets hit him in the side, the shoulder, and the head. Sources say White appeared calm when he surrendered. His wife was driven to Northern Station, then taken to the Hall of Justice.
In police custody, Dan White choked through tears as he walked investigators through the murders he had just committed.
Under an awful lot of pressure, lately, financial pressure because of my job situation.
The recording was played for reporters and outlined Dan White's frustration with the mayor and how he felt betrayed by Supervisor Harvey Milk.
And Supervisor Milk, some others were working against me to get my seat back on the board. I learned of this. I was in the city attorney's office when Supervisor Milk called, stating that he was of that mind. He didn't speak to me, he spoke to the city attorney. I was in the office and I heard the conversation, and that he was going to try to prevent me from taking my seat again.
He explained that he packed his gun and made his way to City Hall.
I didn't have any device plan or anything. I was leaving the house to see the mayor, and I went downstairs to make a phone call, and I had my gun down there.
He walked into the mayor's office and was told he would not be reappointed to his supervisor's seat.
Didn't have even the courtesy to call me or tell me that I wasn't going to be reappointed. And then I got kind of fuzzy and just my head didn't feel right. And then he said, let's go into the back room and have a drink and talk about it.
White says the mayor told him people in his district no longer wanted him to represent them, and a replacement would be announced at a press conference later that morning.
Just all the time knowing he's going to go out and lie to the press and tell them, you know, that I wasn't a good supervisor and that people didn't want me. And then that was it. Then I just shot him.
Dan White left through a back door, started to head downstairs, and saw one of Harvey Milk's aides across City Hall. He turned back and went to confront Milk.
You know, I just agree with him on a lot of things, but I was always honest, you know. And here that was devious, and then he started kind of smirking, because he knew I wasn't going to be reappointed. And it just didn't make any impression on him. I started to say, you know, how hard I worked for it, and what it meant to me and my family and my reputation, and a hard working, good, honest person. And He just kind of smirked at me, as if to say, too bad. And then I just got all flushed and hot, and I shot him.
Word of the murder spread quickly across the city. In Milk's district, shock.
This was more than Harvey Milk's district. These were his people, the ones he loved, the ones he worked so hard for at City Hall.
My initial reaction was confusion, frustration, fear. I don't know. It seems like San Francisco's become the collecting place for every crazy in the world.
I feel very sad. I once met Mayor Moscone, and I have my photography work done at Harvey Milk's business, but what I think we all need to think about is gun control.
Dan White's neighbors were stunned to hear their supervisor was a killer.
We were there within minutes after it happened, Shawnee Street, San Francisco. And as we arrived, a Dan White family member went speeding away in a car, leaving the street empty, but the air was filled with the horrible news. The clean-cut young politician from down the street was being arrested. The mayor and the supervisor were dead.
I can't understand what happened to him.
There was no hint of anything wrong?
Not a thing. We liked the guy very much. We voted for him and was glad to do it. Hoped that he was going to do a lot of good, but he didn't.
Things like this that happen, you know, in your own neighborhood like this, it's not right. It's just not right. It's always something drastically wrong with, I don't know whether it's with us or whether it's with the whole world, but not a person like him.
At the Moscone home, the family gathered.
The neighborhood is relatively quiet, and the neighbors all seem very stunned as they try to understand what has happened.
I found out from my mom's friend, her best friend actually told me at the house. Everyone was at the house. There were reporters outside the house. We were brought home from school, and she told me, your father is dead, he's been killed. So you remember it very well because the air changed forever. Ours was a very rare circumstance, not being shot, but being assassinated. A phenomenon that is rare in American politics. And so we were part of that narrative. We suddenly became part of that narrative while having the other narrative, which was we lost our dad.
The Moscones lost a father and husband. The city lost its leader. A community lost heroes. People began to gather at the steps of City Hall, looking for answers.
Here at City Hall, people are overwhelmed by the tragedy. They've been coming in here in droves.
Milk was a very dedicated person to all the people of San Francisco and a personal friend. Also, Mayor Moscone was a beautiful and warm person and a personal friend. I'm deeply shocked as much as the city is.
They only assassinate good people. Bad people, nothing happens to them.
By nightfall, Dan White sat in a jail cell. Concerned he may hurt himself, officers were under orders to check on him every 15 minutes, 24 hours a day. Those who had gathered at the steps of City Hall were joined by a candlelight procession that made its way from the Castro District to Civic Center. The crowd swelled to 50,000 people. Harvey Milk knew he'd be a target for assassination. He made 3 recordings, each slightly different, with his final wishes shortly after he was elected. Portions of one of those tapes were read out loud to the silent crowd. Years later, one of those tapes would land in the hands of the GLBT Historical Society, giving the public a chance to hear Milk speak.
These are Harvey's words. I know that when a person is assassinated after they have achieved victory, there are several possibilities. One is to have some people go crazy in the streets, angry and frustrated. And the other is to have a big show or a splash, a great big service. Naturally, I want neither. I cannot prevent anybody from getting angry or mad or frustrated. I can only hope that they'll turn anger and frustration and madness into something positive.
I would hope they take it to positive, and I would hope 5, 10, 100,000 would rise. I'd love to see every gay doctor come out. I'd love to see every gay lawyer, every gay judge, every gay bureaucrat, every gay architect come out.
I hope that every gay will just say, enough. Come forward and tell everybody. Wear a sign, let the world know.
The world know that would do more to end prejudice overnight. I ask for a movement to continue, for a movement to grow, because last week I got that phone call.
I got that phone call
from Altoona, Pennsylvania. In my election, gave somebody else, one more person, hope.
And there's at least one person out there who has hope.
And after all, that's what it's about. It's not about personal gain, not about ego, not about power. It's about giving those young people out there in Altoona, Pennsylvania's hope. You gotta give them hope.
Swing low, sweet chariot.
It was the start of a period of mourning in the city, one that continued for days. By midweek, both George Moscone and Harvey Milk lay in state in San Francisco City Hall. Thousands gathered in silence for the fallen leaders.
In our sorrow, this lovely jewel of a city seems a dark and saddened place. To carry me on home.
Good morning, I'm Van Amberg along with Linda Yu, Jim Vargas, and Father Ed Lynch as News Scene continues the solemn ceremonies that make up San Francisco's week of mourning over the murders of Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk.
Ironically, the service was held at the same church where Dan White met his wife before turning himself into police.
And the men and women around the country who serve their own cities in the same way came too, to bury one of their own. And they included former mayors, Joseph Alioto, George Christopher, New York's John Lindsay. The people of government also came to do honor to the memory of George Moscone, his fellows in the legislature, those who knew him in Washington, and those who spent a tumultuous 3 years with him in San Francisco's City Hall.
Moscone's children read scripture.
But the just man, though he die early, shall be at rest.
Choking back tears.
For our city and for all those who are in public office, that we may work for justice and true peace. We pray for
Lord. And said goodbye to a father who gave his life for the city he loved.
The Lord is my shepherd. Nothing I shall want.
Whenever I remember you in my prayers, as indeed I do constantly, night and day. Recalling your tears when we parted, I yearn to see you again. That would make my happiness complete. I find myself thinking of your sincere faith, the spirit which God has given us in no cowardly spirit, but rather one that makes us strong, loving, and wise.
It was like an endurance test of having to stand up to suffering in a public way, which was just what you had to do. There was no choice.
Hours later, a public memorial for Harvey Milk was held with a much different tone.
Not been so much a memorial for Harvey Milk, although it certainly has been that, as it has been a true celebration of gay unity, gay pride.
As a tribute to Harvey Milk, and as an affirmation of our own freedom and integrity and wholeness, I call upon every gay person in this room, in this city, in this country, to come out to your friends, your employers, your clergy, your bankers, your neighbors.
Because this was his city. He loved it and he believed in it. I was proud of what he was doing. And this was more important than I was proud of the symbol he stood for and the attempts he was making and his honesty. And that, to me, was high and above everything else.
With the services completed, the attention turned to City Hall.
I would like to ask that every member present in the chambers stand and say a very silent prayer.
George Moscone was very lucky. He has a wonderful wife, but what it did to that family is obviously enormous. What it did to Harvey's family is obviously enormous. But what it did to the city was really my problem.
I, Diane Feinstein.
Diane Feinstein moved into the role of mayor. She had run against Moscone and lost. In fact, she told a reporter just hours before the assassination that she would not run again.
And early on, I decided that I was not going to let assassination work, that I would keep everybody, from the chief of police to all the commissioners to his staff, until I ran on my own and was mayor in my own right, which was a year from that time. And that's what I did.
Feinstein appointed Don Horanzi to White's seat. Milk left 3 names of potential successors on his assassination recording. Feinstein chose the 3rd, another gay man, Harry Britt. She turned her attention to the daily business of the city, a trial for Dan White looming just 6 months away. Many thought Dan White's confession would result in a death sentence, but almost as soon as the tape had been released, there were questions about White's mental fitness.
I do believe that there was a certain psychopathology present in Dan White that none of us saw. And this happened.
There were questions immediately about Dan White's depression and whether the junk food he ate played a role.
Sources telling me today that when Dan White went into one of these depressive states, he would stay in the house, lie in bed, and watch television. The interesting note is what he ate while he was in one of these moods. Foods with high sugar content like Coke, Pepsi, cupcakes, and Twinkies. The effect of this sugar on his mind and body could be key testimony in the Dan White defense.
At the time, California pediatric allergist Dr. Ben Feingold was touting a now debunked connection between junk food and hyperactive children.
So the effect of that much junk food on, say, an adult's mind is depression, generally?
It could be, yeah. With a high intake of carbohydrates, I say we predict depression, that's right. But remember, there's nothing absolute, because there can always be the exception when you get stimulation.
I understand that. Could it lead to an unusual form of behavior?
Oh, unquestionably. Of all the environmental factors, anything in the environment can be a factor. But I think the so-called junk foods are the most important. And the reason I say that is because we can control the behavior, 60–70% of these individuals involved, by just controlling what we call junk food, the additives in them.
The idea that depression and junk food, Twinkies, drove Dan White to kill.
I don't think anyone in our family believes that anyone who kills anybody isn't suffering from mental illness. If you devalue life to that point, there's something going on with you, period. There's no sane person in a sane moment proactively killing somebody.
There was no disputing that Dan White killed Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Milk. The big question was, should he be sent to San Quentin's death row for planning the murder or get a lesser manslaughter charge that would put him away for a couple of years?
Dan White clearly planned those 2 murders. Dan White entered the city hall by way of a window carrying a gun. He did not go through the normal means by which you get there, which means he had to traverse obstacles of being discovered armed.
How could somebody like Dan White, this all-American boy, do such a despicable thing? And of course, what we know is that's who does it all the time. That's exactly who attacks us. That's who kills us.
Many in the LGBTQ community worried White would get away with the murders because he was a former cop and firefighter.
And then when the jury finally gets convened and, oh my goodness, it's all white heterosexuals. How do you do that in San Francisco at the time was 17% African American, where 18,000 gay men were arriving every day, but you got a jury that's all white? and all straight. Good for you.
The prosecution contended that White intended to kill the mayor and supervisor when he packed his gun and extra bullets before leaving the house.
The gun shows intent. It doesn't at all. It shows that, in fact, he took a gun, and nobody's ever disputed that, and it shows, in fact, that he shot some people with that gun. I don't think a for sure you can go back and say, well, because he took the gun, he intended to kill somebody.
Then there was that window he snuck through instead of using the main entrance.
A civil engineer saw Dan White pacing outside and then crawl through a window.
The civil engineer who called to White after he crawled through the window, "Hey, wait a minute." White waited and said, "My aide was supposed to come down and give me a key but never showed. I'm Dan White, the city supervisor. I gotta go."
White never took the stand in his defense.
I shot him.
Instead, the prosecution played portions of Dan White's arrest confession.
I called my wife. She didn't know. She didn't. You telling her?
5 members of the jury cried while the tape played. White's attorney played up his client's all-American image. He said the tapes, filled with sobbing, showed that Dan White was a broken man. Depressed, unable to take care of his family, not thinking in his right mind. As witnesses took the stand, they tried to portray White as a man who wouldn't normally kill someone. He just snapped.
There were no witnesses known to me and who are known to me at this time who would say that he was an immoral man, apart from having killed George Moscone and Harvey Milk on November 27th, which of course is the most immoral act I can imagine.
When Dianne Feinstein took the stand, Dan White cried. She told the jury she called White to lessen the blow of not being reappointed, but she didn't reach him. When he sped past her on his way to Harvey Milk's office, Feinstein told the jury he was pale-faced, and when she heard the first shot, she was convinced White had killed himself.
When asked by defense if White is the type of a man who would murder 2 people, she said, "No, it would not be my opinion."
Feinstein would later clarify that her statement did not mean she didn't believe White did not kill the mayor and supervisor that day.
I believe it was intended, but I believe it was because of a sense of personal betrayal in that Harvey did not help him regain his appointment.
As the trial wound to a close, the city was divided.
The Dan White murder trial has taken an emotional toll on many. Many observers feel sympathy, understanding, lots of things. But it always comes back to that bottom line. No matter what was going on in Dan White's mind, White did kill the mayor and Harvey Milk.
Degree of responsibility that he had.
Everyone wondered where the jury would land. The trial was so high profile that even local high schools were holding mock trials to understand Dan White's fate.
Most of the people here believe he's first-degree murder. I don't. I don't think he's really guilty of that.
We have reached a verdict, but we're deliberating on special circumstances or not. We don't know whether or not we want him with death or possible paroles.
When the verdict did come down, there was shock and outrage. After 36 hours of deliberation, the jury of 7 women and 5 men announced its verdict.
The verdicts just come in for the killings of George Moscone and Harvey Milk, voluntary manslaughter on both counts. After the verdict, total chaos. No one expected Dan White to get off with voluntary manslaughter twice. What happened here was the jury understood Dan White.
The reaction from city leaders? Stunned.
I'm horrified by the sympathy that they showed for this very violent person. I am insulted that such a hateful act could be looked at as just a momentary aberration rather than seen as a real symptom of a kind of personality that however deranged it is, it's a kind of derangement that society has to fight constantly.
I think that this is a major verdict, and it's going to throw into scrutiny the whole criminal justice system. There was inordinate surprise at the verdict.
It was just hurtful. It's just painful.
They ignored the facts.
And the tension began to increase and increase until it blew up.
Didn't you just hear it? It's outrageous. It's outrageous. It's exactly like saying that a person commits suicide by shooting themselves 5 times in the head, right? I mean, if you shoot a person once, then I can say, well, okay, you didn't know what you were doing. But he shot Moscone in the body, disabled him on the floor, then shot him some more in the head.
It's almost equating the thing, well, almost anybody can go out and kill anybody if they want to, and they can get off, really.
People are in jail for 10 years for possession of marijuana.
What do you think this community is going to be like now?
I think there's going to be a lot of hostility, an awful lot of hostility. A lot of nervous tension tonight may come out. There's going to be a rally down at City Hall. We'll have to see what happens.
They started marching at 7:30, just 2 hours after the verdict came in the Dan White trial. At first, there were only about 300 people moving in an orderly, if sometimes noisy body, 10, 12, 20 abreast, from Castro Street, marching east on Market toward San Francisco City Hall. There was no attempt to stop them. If anything, the police helped, blocking traffic on all sides. But by the time the crowd reached City Hall, it had grown to at least 5,000 people.
The crowd continued to grow, and so did the anger.
People were shouting, "Get Dan White," they said, "Kill Dan White."
Now, if you listen to the video of that night, you hear people screaming, "No more violence." They're talking to the rioters. They're not talking to the police or to Dan White. They didn't want violence.
Supervisor Harry Britt, the man named to replace Harvey Milk, tried to quiet the crowd, but it was no good. They called him names, shouted him down, said he was just a pawn.
There were attempts by some gay activists to ride it out, as if they could prevent violence.
We're forming a line trying to push them back, and we're moving them back away from the building.
You know what happens if it gets out of hand.
Let's all pray that it doesn't.
It did not work. The mob turned their anger on City Hall. And then they turned their anger towards the police, setting their cars on fire.
When those flames went up, the crowd went crazy.
The sound of sirens pierced the night air.
As the police cars began to explode, everybody's long, simmering resentment and rage just blew up.
By 11 o'clock, it was a full-scale riot.
As the police cars continued to burn, officers pushed the angry mob away from City Hall.
But that didn't end it. Fires broke out throughout the city. There was looting along Larkin and Market Streets. Liquor stores were broken into. And still, at 1 o'clock in the morning, police were reporting no arrests. That has now changed. At 2 o'clock, they began to board up City Hall, clean up the glass, and sweep the streets. It was over, for the moment.
I think it's important for everyone in this city to know that we're not going to continue to tolerate this.
Mayor Feinstein was in her office during the riot. She listened as her windows were broken and could smell the tear gas as it wafted up from the street.
By the time the White Night riot was over, 63 officers were injured, 40 civilians were hurt.
Police turned their attention on the city's Castro neighborhood.
So you had quite a few people who deliberately did not go anywhere near City Hall, but hung out in the Castro and were having cocktails and then were attacked.
Retaliation, Jones believes, for the attacks on police during the White Night riots. Whatever the police intended to do, it only widened the divide between the LGBTQ community and the police. The city fell into an uneasy new normal.
What it did to the city was divide it right down the middle, was create a tension, an apprehension, some of it sorrow, some of it hate, very visceral emotions that you don't usually see all came to the surface and bubbled up at that time.
Dan White was sentenced to 7 years and 8 months and sent to Soledad State Prison. Dianne Feinstein would win the mayoral election in 1979.
For from the great diversity of our city can be forged a common effort strong enough to move this city forward.
And began to make changes to Mayor Moscone's City Hall. She made committee and commission appointments and installed a new police chief, Con Murphy. But deep down, she says she knew every decision she made came under scrutiny.
You know, she had to hold her tongue for so many, many years about how she felt about everything. She had to hold the city together. She couldn't lose it.
I know what happened. I lived those times. I've tried to learn from them in terms of the kind of public servant I am. And that's really enough for me. Dan went to state prison for what was 4 years. During those 4 years, the tensions were...
Mayor Feinstein talked to her police chief about the possibility that Dan White may try to return to San Francisco.
So I asked Chief Murphy to go to Los Angeles to see him and to bring with him a letter from me. And in that letter, we simply said that the wounds are still very deep.
And Murphy said that he shouldn't come back to the city. His chances of survival were not good.
He could jeopardize both his family as well as our own public safety.
You didn't get any assurance that he would not, did you?
No, I have not had a response.
White was paroled to Los Angeles.
We need to know why you felt it necessary to go down and warn Dan White not to come home.
Well, I think it was primarily a major concern that the mayor had. She wanted to be sure that Dan White knew what the sentiment in San Francisco was against his returning.
But the LA community did not want him there either.
He did come back. He was not really able to do much. 6 months later, he went downstairs and connected a line to the exhaust of his car and killed himself. I think for San Francisco, this is the final chapter in a very sad part of our history. I hope it's closed.
The final chapter ended today in a garage in San Francisco's Excelsior district, where Dan White apparently took his own life.
He was found in his car today about 10 minutes to 2. There was a hose leading from the exhaust pipe into the car. There was a note left on the windshield of the car to his brother, apologizing for the putting him through the ordeal of finding his body. And there were some other personal notes, one to his wife and one to his mother.
My friends in college were all thinking it was a big moment for us to celebrate, and I just felt like it all felt like, oh, well, now the whole thing was useless. No one. Everyone participated in this died. Just proved how awful and incomprehensible, unjustified, and non-Twinkie defense it was.
The homicide inspector who took Dan White's confession was a childhood friend. In 1998, he dropped a bombshell. White had intended to kill more people that day, including another supervisor and a close friend of Mayor Moscone.
He said, "You know, Frank, I really lost it that day, didn't I?" And I said, "Dan, you really did." He says, "Well, I wanted to get Carol Ruth Silver, and I wanted to get Willie Brown too."
It still, to this day, must traumatize every one of those jurors, because by now they've got to know that this was a planned, premeditated attack on two other human beings, with plans for additional premeditated attacks on other human beings. And they've got to know that. They've got to live with that.